Rain hit the pavement like needles as Ethan Cole stood with nothing but a duffel bag and his German shepherd, Rex, when the old house key led him to his grandma's forgotten home. But that first night, a sound came from beneath the floor, a slow knock every 27 seconds. Rex froze, ears high, then moved, guiding him to the basement door he swore he'd never open again. The air below felt wrong. Too still, too alive. Rex scratched once, then twice. And when Ethan pulled back the wall panel, a hidden staircase breathed cold air into the room. Something down there was waiting, and it wasn't just money. Some houses don't make noise until they're ready to be heard. The first night Ethan Cole stepped back into his grandmother's house, the silence felt heavier than anything he had carried in years, heavier than the duffel bag slung over his shoulder, heavier than the memories he tried not to unpack. Rain tapped softly against the windows, a slow and steady rhythm that seemed to echo through the hollow rooms. And beside him, Rex stood still, his amber eyes scanning the darkness as if reading something hidden between the walls. The house smelled faintly of dust and cedar, like time had settled into every corner and refused to leave. Ethan dropped his bag near the door and ran a hand along the worn wooden table, his fingers tracing grooves left by decades of quiet living. This place used to feel safe, back when his grandmother would hum in the kitchen and the world outside felt far away. But now it felt different, not abandoned, not broken, just waiting, as if it had been holding its breath for years. He moved slowly through the living room, boots creaking against the old floorboards, each step stirring echoes that didn't quite fade. And then he heard it, a soft knock, so faint he almost thought it was the rain shifting against the siding. He stopped, listening. Rex's ears snapped forward, his body going rigid in that familiar way Ethan had learned to trust more than any instinct of his own. The dog didn't bark, didn't growl. He just listened, deeply, like something beneath them was speaking in a language only he could understand. Ethan exhaled slowly, shaking his head, just the house settling. He murmured, though the words didn't sit right. He took another step, and then it came again. Knock, quieter this time, but deliberate, measured, like a heartbeat that didn't belong to him. Rex turned, not toward the door, not toward the windows, but toward the far end of the hallway, where a narrow wooden door stood closed. The basement. Ethan hadn't opened it in over 20 years, not since the day his grandmother told him, in a voice softer than usual, that some places were better left alone until the right time. He remembered the way she said it, not as a warning, but as if she was protecting something, or someone. Rex padded forward, each step careful, controlled, his nose low to the ground as if following a scent that hadn't existed a moment ago. Ethan felt a slow tension build in his chest, the kind that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with recognition, like standing at the edge of something he didn't understand but somehow knew he had been meant to find. The air grew cooler as he approached the door, carrying a faint, metallic tang that didn't belong in an old house. Rex stopped just inches from it, lifted one paw, and pressed it gently against the wood, then looked back at Ethan, not anxious, not afraid, just certain. The knock came again, clearer now, from the other side, steady, patient, as if whatever was down there had been waiting for this exact moment. Ethan stared at the handle, worn smooth from years of use, and felt his pulse slow instead of race, because somewhere deep inside, beneath the exhaustion and the loss and the long road that had led him here, he realized something he couldn't explain. This wasn't a coincidence, and whatever waited below that door had always known he would come back. The handle felt colder than it should have, as if the metal remembered every hand that had ever turned it and was not yet ready to forget. Ethan rested his palm against it, but did not twist, not yet, because something in the rhythm below the floor had changed. The knocking had stopped, not faded, not weakened, just stopped completely, and the silence that followed was deeper than before, thick enough to press against his ears. Rex did not move away from the door. He remained there with quiet focus, his ears slightly angled, his breathing steady, as if he was still listening to something that had not truly gone. Ethan swallowed and glanced back down the hallway. The house behind him sat in stillness, every shadow resting where it should be, every object untouched. Yet it felt like the entire place was leaning toward that door, waiting with him. He let out a slow breath and finally turned the handle, The old latch gave with a soft click that echoed louder than it should have. The door opened inward with a long, tired creak, releasing a draft of cool air that brushed against his face. It carried a scent he could not immediately place, something faintly metallic, mixed with the dry, aged smell of wood and stone. Rex stepped forward without hesitation, crossing the threshold before Ethan could second-guess himself. The narrow staircase descended into darkness, each step worn at the center from years of use. Though Ethan could not remember anyone going down there in all the years he had lived with his grandmother, he reached to the wall and found a switch, hesitated for half a second, then flipped it. A single overhead bulb flickered to life below, casting a dim amber glow that barely reached the bottom. The light swayed slightly, as if disturbed by something unseen. Ethan began to descend, his boots pressing carefully against each step. The wood responded with low creaks that seemed to answer one another deeper in the structure. Rex moved ahead of him, not rushing, not cautious, simply certain, as though he had walked this path before in some other way. Halfway down, Ethan paused. The air felt different here, heavier, but not suffocating. More like stepping into a place that held its own quiet rules. He could feel a subtle vibration under his boots, faint but steady, the same pattern he had heard earlier, only now it felt closer, more present. He continued down until his feet reached the concrete floor. The basement opened into a wide space that surprised him. It was cleaner than he expected, not abandoned, not neglected. The surfaces were covered in a thin layer of dust, but nothing was broken, nothing collapsed. The shelves along the walls held neatly stacked boxes, old jars, tools arranged with a care that suggested intention rather than forgetfulness. The bulb above hummed softly, casting long shadows that shifted as Ethan moved. Rex walked straight across the room, ignoring everything else, heading toward the far wall. Ethan followed, his eyes scanning the space, trying to reconcile what he saw with what he remembered. This was not just storage, it felt organized, purposeful, like a place someone had prepared for something or someone. Rex stopped at the wall and lowered his head, sniffing along the baseboard. Then he scratched once, paused, and scratched again in the exact same spot. Ethan crouched beside him, running his hand along the wood. It felt solid at first, but then his fingers caught on a slight inconsistency, a seam that should not have been there. His pulse slowed again, not out of calm, but out of focus. He pressed gently. Nothing happened. He pressed harder, and a faint shift answered him from within the wall. A soft internal movement, like something unlocking after a long rest. The panel gave way just enough to reveal a narrow gap, a thin line of darkness behind it that seemed deeper than the room itself. Ethan leaned closer. The air that escaped from the opening was colder, carrying that same metallic scent, stronger now. And beneath it, something else, something older, like stone that had not seen light in decades. Rex stepped back slightly, not in fear, but in acknowledgement, as if his part in finding it was complete. Ethan slid his fingers into the gap and pulled. The panel moved slowly, reluctantly, until it opened just wide enough to reveal what lay behind it. A second staircase, narrower than the first, descending further into darkness. The light from above barely touched the top step, leaving the rest swallowed in shadow. Ethan stared at it, his mind searching for logic, for explanation, but finding none that felt complete. His grandmother had lived here alone for years, quiet, gentle, never giving any sign of secrets, and yet this had been here all along, hidden within the walls of her home, waiting. He glanced back at Rex. The dog met his gaze with steady eyes, calm and unwavering, as if to say that this was not something to fear, but something to understand. Ethan turned back to the staircase. The faint vibration beneath his feet returned, stronger now, not loud, not violent, just present, like a steady pulse rising from below. He placed one foot on the first hidden step. The wood did not creak, did not shift. It held firm, as if it had been waiting for weight again. And as he stood there between the known and the unknown, he realized something that settled deeper than any memory. Whatever was down there had not just been hidden, it had been kept, protected, preserved with intention, and now, for reasons he could not yet explain, it had chosen to reveal itself to him. The darkness below did not feel empty. It felt occupied by something patient, something that had learned how to wait without fading. Ethan stood at the edge of the hidden staircase for a long moment, his hand resting lightly against the wall, as if grounding himself in the part of the house he still understood. But the air rising from below carried that same quiet pull, not demanding, not threatening, just present in a way that made turning back feel like ignoring something important. Rex stepped forward first, placing one paw onto the narrow step, then another, moving with a calm certainty that left no room for hesitation. Ethan followed, lowering himself carefully, each step descending deeper into a space that felt removed from time itself. The light from above faded quickly, leaving only a faint glow that stretched partway down the staircase before surrendering to shadow. Yet even in that dimness, he could see enough to know this place had not been forgotten. The wood beneath his boots was firm, untouched by rot, and the walls, though close, were smooth and deliberate, as if built with purpose, rather than convenience. Halfway down, he noticed the sound again, not a knock this time, but a low, steady hum, almost like a distant machine or the quiet turning of something unseen. It was subtle, but consistent, and it seemed to resonate through the structure itself. Rex paused briefly, turning his head slightly, as if adjusting to the rhythm, then continued, guiding Ethan further until the staircase finally opened into a second chamber, smaller than the basement above, but far more precise in its design. The ceiling was lower, supported by thick beams that looked newer than anything upstairs, and along the walls, narrow shelves held objects arranged with careful symmetry: glass jars, sealed containers, and small metal boxes, all placed as if their positions mattered. Ethan stepped forward slowly, his eyes moving across the room, taking in details that did not belong to the life he remembered his grandmother living. This was not storage, this was preparation. The air here was cooler, but cleaner, carrying that same metallic edge, yet beneath it, there was something else, a faint warmth, like the lingering presence of activity that had only recently stopped. Rex moved deeper into the room, his nails making soft clicks against the concrete floor, until he reached the center where a large wooden table stood, its surface clear except for a single object placed precisely in the middle. Ethan approached, his breath steady, his thoughts unusually quiet, as if whatever this place was, it required a different kind of attention. The object was a small box, no larger than a shoebox, made of dark wood with smooth edges and no visible lock, no markings, nothing to explain its purpose. Yet it did not feel ordinary. It felt deliberate, like everything else in this room, placed exactly where it needed to be. Rex sat beside the table, looking up at Ethan, his expression calm, expectant, as though this was the point they had been moving toward from the very beginning. Ethan hesitated for just a second, then reached out and placed his hand on the box. The surface was warm, not from temperature, but from something deeper, like it had absorbed years of quiet intention. He lifted the lid slowly, expecting resistance, but it opened with ease, revealing its contents without a sound. Inside, resting on a folded cloth, was a bundle of papers, neatly tied. With a thin piece of string, beside it, a small metal key lay still, its surface worn but carefully maintained. Ethan picked up the papers first. The texture was firm, preserved, and as he untied the string and unfolded the top page, his eyes moved across handwriting he recognized instantly, his grandmother's, steady and precise, each letter formed with the same patience she had shown in everything she did. He read the first line, and something inside him shifted in a way he could not fully explain. Not shock, not disbelief, but recognition, as if the words were not surprising, only long delayed. The note did not begin with instructions or explanations. It began with understanding, with a quiet acknowledgement of who he was and where he had been, as though she had known this moment would come long before he ever stood in this room. Rex remained still beside him, the faint hum in the walls continuing its steady rhythm, and as Ethan read on, the edges of his past and present began to align in ways that made sense of things he had never questioned before. The house above, the silence, the closed door, none of it had been accidental. It had been part of something carefully arranged, something meant to reveal itself only when the time was right. Ethan lowered the paper slightly, his eyes drifting to the small key resting in the box, and, for the first time since stepping into the house, he felt something stronger than uncertainty, something steady and grounded, like a path forming beneath his feet, because whatever his grandmother had left behind was not just hidden, it was meant to be found, and not by anyone. But by him the paper did not rush its meaning. It unfolded slowly in his hands the way truth often does, not in sudden clarity, but in quiet layers that settle into place over time. Ethan stood in the dim glow of the hidden room, the faint hum still threading through the walls, and read each line as if the words themselves carried weight beyond ink. His grandmother's handwriting moved across the page with calm precision, not hurried, not uncertain. Every sentence shaped with intention, as though she had known exactly how this moment would feel. The letter spoke not of secrets in the way he expected, not of wealth or warnings, but of patience, of timing, of things that must remain unseen until the right eyes were ready to recognize them. She wrote about the house as if it were more than wood and stone, as if it held memory in its structure and purpose in its silence. She spoke of him not as he was when she last saw him, but as someone she believed he would become, someone who would one day understand why certain doors were closed and why others only opened when nothing else remained. Ethan lowered the paper slightly, his breathing steady but deeper now, as if something inside him had shifted into alignment with the space around him. Rex remained beside the table, his posture relaxed but attentive, watching Ethan with that same quiet awareness that had guided him from the moment they arrived. The hum in the walls softened, not fading, but settling into a rhythm that felt less like a signal and more like a presence. Ethan looked down at the small key resting in the box, its surface worn smooth from years of careful handling. It was not ornate, not decorative, just a simple object shaped for a specific purpose. Yet it carried the same quiet certainty as everything else in the room. He reached for it and held it between his fingers, feeling its weight, its balance, as if it belonged in his hand long before he ever touched it. The letter continued, guiding him not with instructions, but with understanding. It spoke of a second lock, one that could not be seen at first glance, one that required attention rather than force. And as Ethan read those words, his gaze lifted from the page and moved slowly across the room, seeing it differently now, not as a hidden space, but as something arranged with intention. The shelves, the table, the placement of every object. None of it was random. His eyes stopped at the far wall, where a section of concrete looked no different than the rest. Yet something about it held his attention, not visually, but instinctively, the same way Rex had been drawn to the panel above. Ethan stepped toward it, the key still in his hand, the air shifting slightly as he moved, carrying that same metallic note. But now it felt less foreign, more familiar, as if he was beginning to understand the language of this place. Rex followed at a measured pace, not leading this time, but staying close, his presence steady and grounding. Ethan reached the wall and placed his palm against it. The surface was cool, solid, but beneath it, he could feel a faint vibration, not strong, not alarming, just present. He closed his eyes for a brief moment, listening not with his ears, but with the quiet focus that had carried him through moments of uncertainty before. And there it was, subtle but consistent, a pattern, not random, not chaotic, but structured, like a signal waiting to be recognized. He opened his eyes and moved his hand slowly across the surface, searching for any difference, any break in the uniform texture. And then he felt it, a slight indentation, barely noticeable, positioned at a height that aligned perfectly with where the key might fit. He brought the key closer, his fingers steady, and without hesitation, he pressed it into the hidden slot. The fit was exact, as if it had never belonged anywhere else. For a second, nothing happened, and then, deep within the wall, something shifted, not loudly, not dramatically, but with a quiet precision that echoed through the structure. The hum changed, not in volume, but in tone, becoming smoother, more complete. The section of wall in front of him released with a soft internal movement, sliding inward just enough to reveal a narrow compartment behind it. Ethan stepped back slightly, giving the space room to open, and as it did, a soft light emerged from within, not bright, not artificial, but warm and steady, illuminating what had been hidden behind the concrete for all these years. Inside the compartment, arranged with the same careful intention as everything else, were objects that spoke not of wealth in the way the world measured it, but of something deeper, documents, records, and items preserved with care, each one carrying a piece of a story that had been protected rather than buried. Ethan stood there, the key still in his hand, the letter resting against his chest, and realized that what his grandmother had left him was not a discovery meant to shock, but a truth meant to be understood, something that required not just finding, but seeing. And as the hidden space fully revealed itself, the house above no longer felt empty. It felt complete, as if every quiet moment, every closed door, had been leading to this one place, this one understanding, that sometimes what is hidden is not meant to be kept away, but to be kept safe until the right person is ready to carry it forward. The light inside the hidden compartment did not flicker or strain. It held steady with a quiet warmth that seemed untouched by time. Casting a soft glow across the objects arranged within, Ethan stepped closer, drawn not by curiosity alone, but by a growing sense of recognition, as if each item had been waiting not just to be found, but to be understood. The documents were stacked neatly, bound in simple folders that showed no sign of decay, their edges clean, their surfaces preserved with care. He reached out and lifted the first one. The paper inside felt firm and deliberate, not fragile, not forgotten, as though it had been prepared to last exactly this long. Rex stood just behind him, silent and still, his presence grounding the moment in something real, something steady. Ethan opened the folder slowly, his eyes scanning lines of typed text, official seals, signatures, dates that stretched back decades. Yet none of it felt distant. It felt immediate, connected. The names he saw were unfamiliar at first, but the patterns they formed were not random. They pointed to something structured, something built over time with intention and care. He turned a page, then another, and began to understand that what lay before him was not a collection of forgotten records. It was a record of purpose, investments made quietly, properties acquired and held, accounts maintained with precision, all under names that traced back, in careful sequence, to his grandmother, but not in the way he had known her. Not as the woman who baked in the mornings and sat by the window in the evenings, but as someone who had been shaping something far larger beneath the surface of a simple life. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of the discovery settling not as shock, but as clarity, as if pieces of a story he had never heard were finally aligning. He set the folder down gently and reached for another. This one thinner, handwritten, the ink steady and familiar. His grandmother's voice carried through the lines not as explanation, but as guidance. She wrote about stewardship, about holding something not for ownership, but for continuity, about understanding value not in what could be taken, but in what could be protected and passed forward. Ethan felt a quiet shift inside him, not a sudden change, but a steady realignment, as if something he had been searching for without knowing had finally come into focus. Rex moved slightly, stepping closer to the open compartment, his nose lifting toward the air as if sensing something more beyond what Ethan could see. Ethan followed that instinct, looking deeper into the compartment, and noticed a second layer, a lower shelf partially concealed by the arrangement above. He crouched down and carefully moved the upper folders aside, revealing a set of small metal boxes, each one labeled with a simple date. No descriptions, no markings beyond time itself. He picked one up, its surface cool and smooth, and opened it. Inside, resting on a soft lining, was a collection of items that did not fit the pattern of documents and records, photographs, old but preserved, each one capturing moments that felt both personal and significant. He lifted one. The image showed his grandmother standing beside a man he did not recognize, both of them younger, both of them looking not at the camera, but at something beyond it, something unseen. The expression on her face was not one he remembered. It was focused, determined, as if she was part of something that required more than quiet living. Ethan set the photograph back carefully, his mind moving through possibilities, none of which fully explained what he was seeing, yet all of which pointed to the same conclusion, that the life she had lived on the surface had only been part of the truth. The rest had been here, beneath, protected and waiting. He reached for another box, opening it with the same care. Inside was a small device, simple in design, its purpose not immediately clear, but it carried the same sense of intention as everything else, not random, not forgotten, but placed with meaning. Rex let out a soft breath, Not a bark, not a warning, just a quiet acknowledgement, as if whatever this place held was no longer hidden from them. Ethan sat back slightly, the key still resting in his hand, the letter close against his chest, and looked around the room once more, seeing it now not as a hidden chamber, but as a foundation, something built to support what had been kept above and what would now move forward. The hum in the walls had softened even further, blending into the background like a steady presence rather than a signal, and in that stillness, Ethan understood something that did not need to be spoken, that this was not an ending, not a discovery meant to close a chapter, but the beginning of something he had been chosen to continue, not because he had searched for it, but because he had arrived at the moment when he was ready to carry it. And as Rex settled beside him, calm and certain, the house above no longer felt like a place he had returned to. It felt like a place he had finally stepped into for the first time. The room did not feel smaller the longer he stayed in it. It felt deeper, as if every object inside it held more than what could be seen at first glance. Ethan remained seated for a moment, letting the quiet settle into something he could understand, not silence, but presence, the kind that did not demand attention yet filled the space completely. Rex shifted slightly beside him, lowering himself to the floor with a slow, deliberate motion, his eyes still alert but no longer searching. As if whatever question had brought him here had already been answered, Ethan glanced at him, a faint breath leaving his chest. Not relief, but something close to acceptance, the kind that comes when confusion gives way to purpose. He reached for the letter again, unfolding it carefully, his grandmother's words now carrying a different weight than before. They no longer felt like guidance alone. They felt like continuation, as if she had not simply left instructions, but had extended a path forward. She wrote about seasons, not in terms of weather, but in terms of life, about how some seasons are meant for building, others for waiting, and a few rare ones for stepping into what has been prepared long before. Ethan read that line twice, not because he did not understand it, but because it understood him. He leaned back slightly, his gaze moving across the room once more, seeing it now not as a discovery, but as a beginning point. The shelves, the documents, the carefully preserved items, they were not the end of a story. They were tools, resources meant to be used, carried forward. Rex lifted his head, ears tilting toward the far corner of the chamber, not in alarm, but in recognition. Ethan followed his gaze and noticed something he had overlooked before, a narrow metal panel set into the wall, partially hidden behind one of the support beams. It was subtle, almost designed to be missed unless one was looking for more. He stood and walked toward it, the air shifting slightly as he moved, the faint hum adjusting in tone, as if responding to his presence. He reached the panel and ran his fingers along its edge. The surface was smooth, cooler than the surrounding concrete, and unlike the hidden door above, this one did not reveal its purpose immediately. There was no visible slot, no handle, nothing to indicate how it might open. Ethan paused, the key still resting in his palm, but something told him this was not meant for the key. He closed his eyes briefly, listening again, not just to the hum, but to the rhythm beneath it, the same steady pattern he had felt earlier. It was clearer now, more defined, not just a vibration, but a sequence, measured and intentional. He placed his hand flat against the panel, aligning his breathing with that rhythm, and for a moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, almost imperceptibly, the surface beneath his hand warmed, not physically, but in a way that felt responsive, as if the wall itself was acknowledging him. Rex stood and stepped closer, his presence steady at Ethan's side, and then the panel shifted, not outward, not inward, but sliding gently to the side with a quiet precision that echoed through the chamber, revealing a narrow recess behind it. Inside, mounted securely, was a small console unlike anything else in the room, simple in appearance, yet clearly functional. A set of switches, a single dial, and a display that glowed faintly with soft light, not modern, not outdated, but something in between, designed with purpose rather than style. Ethan leaned in, studying it. The display showed a series of numbers and symbols that did not immediately make sense, but the arrangement felt deliberate, structured, like everything else he had encountered here. He reached out but did not touch it, not yet, because the letter in his hand still held something he had not fully read. He stepped back and unfolded the remaining pages, his eyes scanning for the part that connected to this. And there it was, written not as instruction, but as understanding. His grandmother spoke of systems, of balance, of maintaining something that could not be left unattended. She wrote about trust, not in others, but in oneself, in knowing when to act and when to observe. Ethan lowered the paper, the connection forming not as a sudden realization, but as a quiet certainty. This place was not just meant to be found, it was meant to be operated, maintained, continued. He looked at the console again, then at the key in his hand, then back at the room as a whole, everything aligned in a way that left no room for doubt. This was not an inheritance in the way people usually understood it. It was a responsibility, one that had been prepared carefully, protected patiently, and now placed in his hands at the exact moment he was ready to receive it. Rex exhaled softly, settling beside him once more, and in that steady, grounded presence, Ethan felt something he had not felt in a long time. Not uncertainty, not searching, but direction, the kind that does not come from outside, but rises quietly from within. And as he stood there, between what had been hidden and what was now revealed, he understood that the next step would not be given to him. It would be chosen, and for the first time since he arrived, he was ready to take it. The console did not demand to be used. It simply waited, its soft glow steady and patient, as if it had already measured the time it would take for Ethan to decide. He stood in front of it with the letter still in his hand, feeling the weight of something that could not be rushed, not because it was fragile, but because it was precise. Rex remained close, his presence calm, his breathing slow and even, as if the dog understood that this moment was not about urgency, but alignment. Ethan reached out slowly, his fingers hovering just above the surface of the console. The faint light reflected against his skin, and for a brief moment, he hesitated, not out of fear, but out of respect, because whatever this system was, it had not been built for curiosity alone. It had been built for intention. He glanced down at the letter once more, his eyes finding a line he had almost overlooked, a sentence written with the same quiet clarity as the rest. It spoke of readiness not as knowledge, but as recognition, of knowing when something felt right, not because it was explained, but because it resonated. Ethan exhaled softly and placed his hand on the console. The surface was smooth, slightly warm now, as if responding to his touch. The display shifted immediately, the symbols rearranging themselves into a pattern that felt less abstract, more familiar, not readable in the traditional sense, but understandable in a way that did not require translation. The hum in the walls deepened slightly, not louder, but fuller, like a system awakening rather than activating. Rex lifted his head, ears tilting forward, but remained still, grounded. Ethan moved his hand toward the dial, turning it slowly, carefully. The motion met no resistance, only a gentle precision that guided his movement rather than opposed it. As the dial shifted, the display responded, the symbols aligning into sequences that felt structured, intentional. And then, beneath the console, a soft click echoed through the chamber, subtle but distinct. Ethan paused, listening. The sound did not repeat, but something had changed. He could feel it, not in the air, not in the walls, but in the space itself. As if something deeper had acknowledged the input, he stepped back, slightly, his eyes scanning the room, searching for any visible change. At first, nothing appeared different. The shelves remained still, the light steady, the hum consistent. But then, slowly, along the far side of the chamber, a thin line of light appeared at the base of the wall, so faint it could have been missed if he had not been looking for it. Rex stood and moved toward it without hesitation, his steps quiet, deliberate. Ethan followed, his attention fixed on the subtle glow that now traced a narrow outline along the concrete. As they approached, the line grew clearer, revealing itself as the edge of another concealed panel, one that had been completely invisible before. Ethan knelt beside it, running his hand along the seam. It felt different from the others, smoother, more refined, as if it had been designed to open only after something else had been set in motion. He pressed gently, and this time, the response was immediate. The panel lifted upward with a soft, controlled motion, revealing a shallow compartment beneath the floor. Inside, illuminated by the same warm light, was a set of objects that carried a different kind of weight. Not documents, not records, but tools, instruments designed with precision, each one placed in its own space, secured and preserved. Ethan leaned closer, his eyes moving across them, trying to understand their purpose. Some resembled measuring devices. Others looked like components of a system he had only begun to recognize, and at the center, resting in a recessed slot, was a small rectangular device, no larger than a paperback book, its surface smooth, its edges clean, with a single interface that mirrored the design of the console behind him. Ethan reached for it. Lifting it carefully, it was lighter than he expected, yet it carried a sense of completeness, as if it was not just a part of the system, but a key element of it. The moment he held it, the hum in the chamber shifted again, not in tone, but in presence, becoming more balanced, more stable. Rex exhaled softly, settling beside him once more, his posture relaxed, as if whatever threshold they had crossed was now behind them. Ethan stood slowly, the device in his hand, the console still glowing quietly behind him, and looked around the room with a new understanding. This was not just a place of discovery, it was a place of transition. Something had been passed to him, not suddenly, not forcefully, but through a process that required him to see, to listen, to choose, and now that he had, the space itself had responded, revealing the next layer, the next step. He glanced at Rex, a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his expression, and then back at the room, realizing that whatever came next would not be hidden from him anymore. Because he was no longer searching, he was part of it. The device in Ethan's hand did not feel like something newly discovered. It felt familiar in a way that bypassed logic, as if his fingers had known its shape long before this moment. He turned it slightly, studying the smooth surface, the quiet precision of its design. There were no labels, no instructions, nothing to explain what it was meant to do, yet it carried the same silent confidence as everything else in the chamber, not asking to be understood, only to be recognized. Rex remained close, his body relaxed now, his breathing slow and even, as if whatever threshold they had crossed had settled something deep within him. Ethan took a slow breath and glanced back toward the console, the soft glow still steady, unchanged, yet somehow different now that the device was in his hand. He stepped toward it, not with hesitation, but with a growing sense of alignment, as if each movement was part of something already in motion. The hum in the walls responded subtly, not louder, but more defined, like a tone, sharpening into clarity. Ethan reached the console and held the device just above its surface, pausing for a moment, feeling the quiet tension between action and understanding. Then, without forcing it, he lowered the device into place. The fit was exact, seamless, as if the two had always belonged together. The moment it connected, the display shifted instantly, the soft symbols dissolving into a clearer sequence, lines and shapes forming patterns that now felt structured, purposeful. The hum deepened again, spreading through the chamber with a steady resonance that seemed to reach beyond the walls. Rex lifted his head slightly, ears forward, but remained calm, grounded. Ethan watched as the console responded, not with sudden change, but with gradual clarity. The dial adjusted itself slightly beneath his hand, the switches aligning into a new position, and then, beneath the floor, a low, smooth motion began, not a vibration, not a disruption, but a transition, something shifting into place. Ethan stepped back, his eyes moving across the room, searching for the source, and then he saw it. Along the far wall, beyond the shelves and the table, the concrete surface began to separate, not cracking, not breaking, but parting with a quiet precision, revealing a wider opening than anything before, a passage, deeper, broader, illuminated by the same warm, steady light. It did not feel hidden in the way the others had. It felt revealed, as if it had always been there, simply waiting for the right moment to be seen. Rex stood and moved toward it without hesitation, his steps steady, confident. Ethan followed, the device now resting within the console behind him. The chamber no longer just a place of discovery, but a point of transition. As he approached the newly opened passage, the air shifted again, carrying a different quality, less metallic, more grounded, like earth that had been untouched yet cared for. The light within the passage did not flicker or strain. it guided, soft and consistent, leading further into a space that felt both unknown and inevitable. Ethan stepped through, his boots meeting a surface smoother than the concrete behind him. The walls here were different, finished with a precision that suggested intention beyond concealment. This was not a hidden room, it was an extension, a continuation of whatever had been built here. The passage widened as he moved forward, opening into a larger chamber that took his breath for a moment, not because of its size alone, but because of its presence. The space felt alive in a way that was not overwhelming, but steady, balanced. Along the walls, systems and structures extended outward, organized, purposeful, each element connected to the next in a way that formed a cohesive whole. This was no longer about storage or preservation. This was operation, function, a system designed to do something that had been maintained quietly, patiently. Over time, Ethan slowed his steps, taking it in, not rushing, allowing the space to reveal itself at its own pace. Rex moved beside him, no longer leading, but accompanying, his presence a constant, grounding force. Ethan's eyes moved across the room, noting details, connections, patterns that began to form a larger understanding. This place was not isolated. It was part of something beyond itself, something that extended outward in ways he had not yet seen. He turned slowly, looking back toward the passage, toward the chamber he had come from, and realized that what he had uncovered was not just a hidden inheritance. It was an entry point, a threshold into something far greater than he had imagined, something that had been prepared not just to be found, but to be continued. And as he stood there, the quiet hum now a steady presence beneath everything, Ethan understood that the journey had not led him here to discover what had been left behind. It had led him here to step into what was still moving forward. The space did not overwhelm him. It unfolded, revealing itself in quiet layers the longer he stood within it. Ethan moved forward slowly, his boots making soft contact with the smooth floor. The sound absorbed rather than echoed, as if the room itself preferred stillness over noise. The systems along the walls extended with careful symmetry, panels, conduits, and structures arranged not for display but for function, each element placed with a clarity that suggested purpose rather than complexity. Nothing here felt excessive, nothing unnecessary. Rex walked beside him, his posture calm, his gaze steady, occasionally pausing to observe something unseen, not searching anymore, but acknowledging, as though he understood that this place was not foreign, only newly revealed. Ethan reached the center of the chamber where a wide console stood, larger than the one behind him, yet designed with the same quiet precision, its surface illuminated by a soft, even light, not bright, not dim, just enough to guide without distracting. He stepped closer, his eyes moving across the display. The patterns here were more defined, less abstract, forming sequences that suggested data, movement, continuity. Though he could not yet interpret them fully, they did not feel random. They felt alive, like a system that had been running long before he arrived, and would continue long after. He placed his hand lightly on the edge of the console, not activating anything, just grounding himself in the moment. The hum beneath the floor responded subtly, not changing, but acknowledging, like a steady breath aligning with his own. He glanced to the side and noticed a series of panels embedded into the wall, each one marked only by a small, engraved symbol. No words, no explanations. Yet the symbols carried a sense of order, like a language built on recognition rather than translation. Ethan stepped toward them, studying their shapes, circles intersecting with lines, patterns that repeated with slight variations. His mind began to map them unconsciously, connecting forms, noticing rhythm, as if something within him was remembering rather than learning. Rex stopped beside one of the panels, his nose lifting slightly. Then he sat, not in alertness, but in quiet confirmation. Ethan looked at the panel in front of him. The symbol etched into it mirrored one he had seen earlier on the console, a pattern that now felt familiar. He reached out and pressed his palm against it. The surface responded instantly, warming beneath his touch, the engraved lines glowing softly, tracing the shape outward. And then the panel shifted, sliding aside with the same smooth precision he had come to expect, revealing a vertical display behind it. The screen lit up with a series of images, not photographs, not recordings, but something between, visual data arranged in a way that told a story without words. Ethan leaned closer, his eyes following the sequences, landscapes, structures, points of light connected by lines that stretched beyond the boundaries of the screen. It was not just a map, it was a network, something expansive, something that extended far beyond this house, far beyond this town. The realization did not come as a shock, it settled into him. Gradually, like a truth that had always been there, waiting to be seen. His grandmother had not been protecting a single place, she had been maintaining a connection, a system that reached outward, linking locations, resources, purposes that he could only begin to understand. Ethan stepped back slightly, his breath steady, his thoughts no longer scattered but focused. This was not about inheritance in the way the world defined it. It was about continuity, about stepping into a role that had been prepared with care and patience. Rex stood and moved closer to him, brushing lightly against his side, a quiet reminder that he was not alone in this, that whatever this system was, whatever it required, they had arrived here together. Ethan looked once more at the display, the lines of connection stretching outward, and then back at the room itself, the systems, the consoles, the quiet hum that held everything in balance, and he understood something that changed the way he saw not just this place, but himself. This was not a hidden secret waiting to be uncovered. It was a living structure waiting to be continued, and he was no longer standing outside of it. He was part of it. And as that understanding settled fully into place, the room responded not with noise or movement, but with a deeper stillness, as if it had been waiting not for him to find it, but for him to recognize it. The realization did not arrive like a sudden answer. It settled into Ethan the way morning light fills a room, slowly, steadily, until everything that once felt unclear began to take shape. He stood in front of the illuminated display, the network of lines and points still shifting gently across its surface, and for the first time, he did not feel like an outsider trying to understand it. He felt like someone being introduced to something he was already meant to know. Rex remained beside him, calm and grounded, his presence steady. As the quiet hum beneath the floor continued its soft rhythm, Ethan lifted his hand and placed it again on the main console, not with hesitation now, but with intention. The system responded instantly, the patterns on the display adjusting, reorganizing, the lines extending further, as if acknowledging his input. He watched closely, noticing how the connections shifted, how certain points brightened while others dimmed, not randomly, but with purpose, like a living map responding to presence, rather than command. He moved his hand slightly, and the system followed, not resisting, not questioning, but aligning, and in that moment, he understood something deeper than function. This was not a machine in the way he had known machines. It was a structure built to respond to awareness, to recognition, to someone who could see the patterns rather than force them. He stepped back slowly, letting the system settle, the display holding its new configuration, the lines steady, the connections clear, and then, at the edge of the screen, something new appeared, a point that had not been visible before, faint at first, then gradually strengthening, its light soft but distinct. Ethan leaned closer, his eyes narrowing slightly. The point pulsed once, gently, then held steady, and beneath it, a small sequence of symbols formed, not random, not abstract, but familiar in a way he could not immediately explain. Rex shifted his weight slightly, his ears tilting forward, not in alertness, but in quiet acknowledgement, as if he too sensed that something had just changed. Ethan's gaze remained fixed on the new point, his mind moving through possibilities, not rushing, not forcing, just observing. And then it came to him, not as a conclusion, but as recognition. This was not just a map of what had been maintained, it was a map of what needed attention, what needed presence, what needed someone to step forward. He glanced around the chamber, taking in the systems, the structures, the quiet precision of everything that had been built here, and understood that this place was not the destination. It was the center, the point from which everything extended outward. The responsibility was not to stay, but to move, to connect, to continue what had been sustained for years without being seen. Ethan exhaled slowly, the weight of that understanding settling into him, not heavy, but grounding, like a foundation finally taking hold. He looked back at the display, at the single illuminated point that had emerged, and felt something shift inside him. Not uncertainty, not doubt, but direction, clear and steady. He reached for the dial again, adjusting it with careful precision. The system responded, the display focusing, narrowing its view, bringing the new point into clearer detail. And as it did, the surrounding lines adjusted, revealing pathways, routes that connected back to the center, to this place. To him, Rex stood and moved closer, his body brushing lightly against Ethan's leg, a quiet presence that felt like agreement, like confirmation. Ethan placed his hand flat on the console once more, not to activate, not to command, but to align, and the system responded in kind, the hum beneath the floor settling into a deeper, more stable rhythm. The light in the chamber softening slightly, not dimming, but balancing, as if everything had reached a new state of equilibrium. He stepped back, his eyes moving from the display to the passage behind him, to the chamber he had come through, and then upward, toward the unseen structure of the house above, and beyond that, to the world outside, the same world he had been standing in just hours before, with nothing but a bag and a key, and now, everything felt different, not because the world had changed, but because he now understood that what had been left to him was not something to hold on to, but something to step into, something that required movement, attention, presence. And as he stood there, the system steady, the new point glowing softly on the display, Ethan realized that this was the moment his grandmother had prepared him for, not through words, not through explanation, but through trust, the kind of trust that does not tell you what to do, but believes you will know when the time comes. And as that realization settled fully into place, the room around him did not react with sound or motion. It simply held, steady and quiet, as if it had always known he would understand. Eventually the point on the display did not blink or flash for attention. It simply remained, steady and quiet, as if it trusted that it had already been seen. Ethan stood there for a long moment, letting the stillness settle around him, not rushing forward, not stepping back, but allowing the weight of what he had understood to find its place within him. Rex shifted beside him, his body brushing lightly against Ethan's leg, a subtle reminder of presence, of grounding, of the fact that whatever came next would not be faced alone. Ethan exhaled slowly and reached for the console once more, his movements no longer exploratory, but intentional. He adjusted the display, narrowing the focus further onto the single illuminated point, and as he did, additional details surfaced, faint at first, then clearer, lines of data, subtle indicators of activity, patterns that suggested movement, change, not in chaos, but in quiet progression. The system was not calling for alarm, it was signaling continuity, something ongoing, something that required attention not because it was failing, but because it was part of a larger balance. Ethan studied the patterns carefully, his mind no longer searching for meaning, but recognizing it as it unfolded. This was not about reacting. It was about responding, about stepping into a role that required awareness more than action. He placed his hand flat against the console again, and the system responded with a gentle shift, the surrounding network dimming slightly, allowing the single point to stand in clearer focus. And then, beneath the display, a new sequence appeared, a path, not highlighted in urgency, but traced with precision, connecting the point back to the center, to this place. To him, Rex lifted his head slightly, his ears tilting forward, and then he turned, not toward the display, but toward the passage behind them, his gaze steady, as if he already understood what the next step would be. Ethan followed his line of sight, looking back through the chamber, through the passage, toward the hidden rooms and the quiet structure of the house above, and beyond that, to the world outside that had not changed, yet now felt entirely different. He took a slow breath, feeling the shift within himself, not hesitation, not doubt, but readiness, the kind that does not come from knowing everything, but from understanding enough to begin. He turned back to the console one last time, his hand resting lightly against its surface, not to activate, not to adjust, but to acknowledge, and the system responded in kind, the hum beneath the floor settling into a deeper, more stable rhythm, the display holding steady, the path clear, not demanding, not urgent, but present. Ethan stepped back, his eyes moving across the chamber once more, taking in the systems, the structures, the quiet precision of everything that had been built here, and for the first time, he did not see it as something separate from himself. He saw it as something he was now part of, something that extended beyond these walls, beyond this moment, into a continuity that he had just begun to understand. Rex moved toward the passage, pausing briefly as if to confirm Ethan was following, then continuing with the same calm certainty that had guided him from the beginning. Ethan glanced once more at the display, at the single illuminated point and the path that connected it back to him. And then he turned, stepping away from the console, away from the chamber, not in retreat, but in transition. The journey ahead no longer hidden, no longer uncertain, but quietly waiting, just as everything else had. And as he followed Rex through the passage, through the hidden rooms, and toward the surface above, the house no longer felt like a place he had returned to. It felt like a starting point, and somewhere beyond its walls, something was waiting, not to be found, but to be continued. The house greeted him differently when he stepped back inside, not with sound, not with movement, but with a quiet familiarity that no longer felt distant. The air above carried the faint scent of rain-soaked wood, and something warmer beneath it, like a memory settling into place. Ethan moved slowly through the hallway, his boots no longer echoing with uncertainty, each step grounded, deliberate. Rex walked beside him, his posture relaxed but aware, as if the world above now held the same quiet signals the space below had revealed. The basement door remained open behind them, but it no longer felt like an entrance to something hidden. It felt like a threshold he had already crossed. Ethan paused near the living room window, the glass slightly fogged from the contrast between the cool night air and the warmth beginning to build inside. Outside, the street remained unchanged, quiet, still, the same stretch of pavement he had stood on not long ago with nothing but a bag and a fading sense of direction. Yet now, even that stillness felt different, not empty, but connected, as if the world beyond the walls was part of the same unseen network he had just begun to understand. Rex lifted his head, ears tilting slightly toward the distance, not reacting to a sound, but to something more subtle, a shift, a presence. Ethan followed his gaze, looking out into the darkness, and for a moment, nothing moved, nothing signaled, and yet, he felt it, the same quiet pull he had sensed beneath the house, not as a demand, but as a direction. He stepped back from the window and turned toward the small table near the wall where he had left his duffel bag. The worn fabric now looked different to him, not because it had changed, but because he had. He opened it slowly, reaching inside, not searching, but preparing, his movements steady, intentional. He removed a small flashlight, a folded jacket, items that once represented survival, now taking on a different meaning, readiness. Rex moved closer, watching him with calm attention, his tail low but steady, not anxious, not restless, just present. Ethan zipped the bag and slung it over his shoulder, the weight familiar, but no longer heavy. He glanced once more around the room, the worn furniture, the quiet corners, the subtle details of a life that had seemed simple, now revealed as something layered, something intentional. His grandmother had lived here, without ever revealing the depth beneath it, not because she was hiding it, but because she understood that some things were not meant to be explained. They were meant to be discovered when the time was right. Ethan stepped toward the door, his hand resting on the handle for a brief moment, feeling the cool metal beneath his fingers, the same way he had felt the basement door earlier. But this time, there was no hesitation. He opened it and stepped outside. The night air greeted him with a soft chill, the scent of rain still lingering, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. Rex followed closely, his paws making soft contact with the ground, his movement steady and aligned. Ethan paused on the small wooden porch, looking out into the quiet street, and then beyond it, into the distance where the darkness held more than just empty space. It held direction, purpose, something waiting not to be found, but to be reached. He reached into his pocket and pulled out the folded piece of paper from his grandmother, the one he had not yet fully understood. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the lines once more, and this time, the meaning settled into him with clarity, not because the words had changed, but because he had. She had not given him instructions, she had given him trust, trust that he would know when to move, where to go, and how to continue what had been quietly sustained for so long. Ethan folded the paper carefully and placed it back into his pocket, his gaze lifting toward the road ahead. Rex stepped forward slightly, then paused, glancing back at him as if to confirm. Ethan gave a small nod, not to the dog, not to the house, but to the understanding that had taken root within him, and together, they stepped off the porch and into the night. Not leaving something behind, but carrying it forward, the quiet hum no longer beneath his feet, but within him, steady, guiding, as the path ahead unfolded not with urgency, but with certainty, and somewhere beyond the edge of the streetlights. The first step of what came next was already waiting. The road did not stretch endlessly before him. It unfolded step by step, revealing only what was needed as Ethan moved forward, the quiet neighborhood fading behind him with each measured pace, the soft glow of the porch light growing smaller until it became just another point in the distance. Rex walked slightly ahead now, not pulling, not rushing, but setting a rhythm that felt natural, steady, aligned with something deeper than instinct. The night air carried a cool clarity, the kind that sharpened thought without overwhelming it, and beneath the distant hum of the world, Ethan could feel it again, not as a sound, not as a signal, but as a quiet presence within him, the same steady rhythm that had once lived beneath the floor of the house now moved with him, guiding rather than directing, suggesting rather than commanding. He reached the edge of the street where the pavement gave way to a narrow path that led beyond the neighborhood, into a stretch of land that had always seemed unremarkable, yet now felt different, not changed, but revealed. Rex paused at the entrance to the path, turning his head slightly, his eyes meeting Ethan's for just a moment, and in that glance, there was no question, only confirmation. Ethan gave a small nod and stepped forward, the ground beneath his boots shifting from smooth pavement to packed earth, the texture grounding, real, the path winding gently ahead, framed by trees that swayed lightly in the night breeze, their leaves whispering in a language that no longer felt distant. The deeper he moved, the more the world around him seemed to quiet, not in absence, but in focus, as if distractions were falling away, leaving only what mattered, the direction, the movement, the quiet certainty that he was exactly where he needed to be. Rex continued at that same steady pace, occasionally glancing to the side, not searching, but acknowledging, as though he could sense the invisible lines that connected this place to something larger. Ethan's mind did not race. It did not question. It settled, aligning with the rhythm that had guided him from the moment he stepped into the house. He reached into his pocket and felt the folded paper there, not taking it out, not needing to read it again, because its meaning was no longer in the words, it was in the movement, in the choice to step forward, in the understanding that what had been given to him was not something to hold on to, but something to live through. The path curved slightly, opening into a wider clearing where the trees thinned and the sky stretched above, the stars faint but steady through the clouded night. And there, at the far edge of the clearing, something caught his attention, not bright, not obvious, but present, a subtle glow, similar to the one he had seen within the chamber, warm, steady, waiting. Rex slowed as they approached, his posture calm, his steps deliberate, and Ethan felt that same quiet recognition settle within him. This was not the end of a journey. It was the continuation of one that had begun long before he ever knew it existed. He stopped at the edge of the glow, not stepping into it immediately, but allowing the moment to settle, to breathe, to become real. The air here felt different, not heavier, not lighter, but aligned, as if this place existed within the same unseen network he had only begun to understand. He looked down at Rex, who now stood still beside him, his eyes forward, his presence steady. And Ethan realized something that felt both simple and profound. He had not been led here. He had chosen to come, guided by something deeper than instruction, something rooted in trust, in recognition, in the quiet understanding that some paths are not shown, they are felt. He lifted his gaze once more toward the glow ahead, and this time, he stepped forward, not with hesitation, not with doubt, but with a calm certainty that did not need to prove itself. The light did not intensify, it did not react. It simply remained, steady and patient, as if it had always been there, waiting not for him to arrive, but for him to be ready. And as he crossed into that space, the world behind him did not disappear. It remained, connected, part of the same quiet system that now moved with him, and somewhere beyond what he could see, beyond what he could yet understand, the path continued, not hidden, not revealed, but unfolding, one step at a time, exactly as it was meant to be.